Hello, Renegade Marketers. Welcome to Renegade Marketers Unite, the top-rated podcast for B2B CMOs and other marketing-obsessed individuals. You're about to listen to a recording of Renegade Marketers Live, our live show featuring the CMOs of Cmo Huddles, a community that's sharing, caring, and daring each other to greatness every day of the week. This time, we've got a conversation with Heather Salerno of Appcast, Marshall Poindexter of OpenEye Scientific, and Gabi Zijderveld of SmartEye that focuses on their company's recent rebrands. It's a really interesting conversation with lots of lessons learned. Two things before we start. One, during the live show, we played some brand video examples from the guests. They're not in the podcast, but you can watch them in the show notes at renegade.com. Two, there's some audio distortion for about 6 minutes of this recording, but there's a lot of goodness in there, so we left it in. Now let's dive in. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, live from Jupiter, Florida, and today we are going to be speaking frankly about the challenges that many B2B CMOs face getting their companies to think about, let alone invest in brand building. In a couple of CMO huddles last year, we came up with numerous euphemisms for brand and brand building because many CEOs and boards consider any reference to brand as a plea to waste money on fluffy stuff. In this worldview, investing in demand gen is good. Spending on brand is bad. This leaves many a CMO in a ridiculous quandary, either trying to educate the purse string holders on the interdependence between brand and demand, or to relegate brand building to an afterthought, or simply labeling brand building something else like air cover for the salespeople, or category building, or revenue marketing, or my favorite, brandquisition. Like so many CMO-related challenges, it's complicated. But here's the good news. We have three amazing CMOs to help you sort it all out. And with that, let's bring in Heather Salerno, CMO of Appcast. Hello, Heather.
Hi, Drew.
How are you and where are you?
I am great. I am in Needham, Massachusetts, which is about 30 minutes outside of Boston.
All right. Okay. Well, I know that you've been at Appcast for a couple years now. First, just tell us what Appcast is for those who are unaware of it.
Yep, you bet. So Appcast helps companies with high volume hiring needs. So we work with recruiting teams to help them find more candidates faster, cheaper. We're based in New Hampshire, right near Dartmouth, and then have staff all over the globe.
Is there a Dartmouth connection?
A bunch of our staff went to Dartmouth and now have family members who work there as well. But other than that.
Well, go Big Green, because my son went there, so it's kind of cool.
Great.
Anyway, there it is. Love that area. Anyway, first of all, business must be really good because people are hiring like crazy, just a replacement. And then certainly in the B2B world, there's tremendous growth. So it must be a busy time.
It is a very busy time. We've been looking a lot at the labor market and trying to do all we can to help our customers.
When you got there, I think it was about 2.5 years ago, can you talk a little bit about your initial mandate as it related to, say, demand gen versus brand building?
Yep. So I have an awesome boss, and I'm not just saying that in case he ever hears this, but he was incredibly clear that I had a three-part mandate. He was super clear. Number one, drive leads. Number two, improve sales messaging and materials. And then three, build the Appcast brand. Now, interestingly, though, in retrospect, I think what he meant was build Appcast brand awareness. But what I realized was that before we could build Appcast brand awareness, we really needed to think more strategically about Appcast brand. What did we stand for? What were our values? What was our personality? The good news is I had a lot of great source material because Appcast had very strong cultural values, great people, and a really delightfully quirky personality. So there was a lot to work with. But the first step really had to be looking at, was there alignment between our actual brand values and then how that was being represented with our visual identity.
Yeah. And I'm really interested in that. I want to talk about the process that you went to. So the values were established and clear as part of the culture. How did you then go about thinking, all right, well, these are our values, but here's how that translates into, one could use the word purpose or why you exist or some other thing that ultimately becomes something that looks like a brand and messaging?
Well, I have to say, we were guided by an incredible agency called Something Familiar. They're based in the UK. They took us through this incredible process and were with us each step of the way. We had quite a bit of educating to do of our senior leadership team and my boss around what the different steps were of the process, and to really educate the group on, just because we want to, exactly as you said, build brand awareness really to drive more leads, we can't do that without taking these kind of critical first steps. And so through partnership with this expert agency, they really led us. I learned a ton. I would not have considered myself a brand expert before starting this project 2.5 years ago. I feel like I now know enough to know how little I know, but I feel like we were just guided by fantastic partners.
From the moment that you hired this agency to the point that you, we'll call it, revealed the new brand story, how long did it take?
It was pretty quick. Gosh, I think it was maybe this won't sound quick. It was felt quick to me, 6 or 7 months.
Okay.
They were amazing. And we went through several steps. We had to do things. And again, this was fully supported by the agency. We had to do things like, socialize and really engage with the change management around, here's why we need to evolve the logo and evolve our colors. And they helped us. They would put together these wonderful decks where we would say, look at these existing, really well-known brands that have gone through this similar process of a brand refresh. You think about a company like MasterCard and we think, oh, MasterCard has always looked like this. Well, no, they actually have evolved their visual identity over time. And so there was, a lot of work being done on the front end, but then there was also work being done in the back end to bring the organization along with that change management.
Which is interesting. And this is such an important part to me. And I write about this a lot in the book, that branding build begins at home, right? We've got to get our employees involved. We've got to get the leadership involved and invested and committed. But often you can rebrand without changing your logo or your colors. I mean, you can go out with a new brand story. And I'm curious, what happened that made you all feel, all right, we really have to bite the bullet and change how we look?
It's such a great question. The issue is that while there were some things that were true, so we are a data and tech company. So yes, we have a lot of smart people who work at Appcast. However, there's also a warmth that's a real part of our personality. And yes, we are serious and determined and earnest, but we also have this quirkiness. So what the agency pushed us on is that what we were conveying with our kind of old colors of blues and greens was unintentionally cold. And there was this warmth that was not being conveyed. We weren't showing our humanity enough. And so they did an awesome job of, they didn't completely scrap the colors, but they enlivened and really enriched the blue, made it brighter. We kept the green, but then we added this lovely we kind of argue internally, is it coral? Is it salmon? It's not orange though, I can tell you that. But, we added this kind of warmer color as well. I knew nothing about fonts when I started. I now know like a little bit more than nothing, but, the font really makes a difference. The old site, it was fine, just to be clear to my colleagues who worked on it before, it was fine, but you'll see it's, it is sort of cold. And what we did was we brought in this new kind of richer, deeper color palette, kind of more of this like, B2C versus B2B feel. And the imagery you're going to see around funnel, that is because just like in marketing, we care about lead funnels. To our audience, they care about their recruitment funnels. And so for us, it's a lot about how do you find more candidates and get them into your hiring funnel.
All right. Well, there we have it. We're going to come back. We'll talk about some of the choices that you made, but it's great. Thank you for sharing that. Let's get Marshall Poindexter, who's the CMO of OpenEye Scientific and the star of episode 15 of this show. That was 18 episodes ago, Marshall. Welcome back.
Glad to be here, Drew. Thanks so much for having me again.
I know that many of your associates at OpenEye are engineers and scientists, and these are not necessarily, it's funny to hear Heather talk about emotional connections and things. These are folks that are not necessarily famous for recognizing either the value of marketing, let alone branding. So let's start there and how you've sort of helped open their eyes, like, dare I say, to the value of marketing in general and brand. Let's just talk about that.
Since I joined OpenEye Scientific, I've been on a mission to really help strengthen the company's brand as our buyers have shifted slightly from the scientific users of the past, the computational chemists, the medicinal chemists who work in pharma companies or biotech companies, to the pharmaceutical and biotech executives who oversee the budgets, but don't necessarily use our software that helps model molecules in the early stage drug discovery process. So what we did is we hired a RAND agency. Interestingly, not that dissimilar from Heather, we hired an agency in the UK, Raw Marketing, that has expertise in the life sciences industry to really, first of all, interview our customers and our prospects, understand what was important to them, and then facilitate workshops with our executive team and our top scientists and our sales leaders to figure out what makes our offerings distinctive in the market and how does that jive with what our prospects and customers are telling us. And what was really interesting was the 100% consistency of responses, both from our prospects and customers and from our internal teams, that are distinctive around science and good science. That consistency shocked even our agency. We've never seen that before. So that was really an aha moment for our executive leadership team, both to reinforce our heritage in science, but also provide a springboard for enhancing and augmenting our message for the 21st century and beyond. So it actually helped turn our founder CEO, who himself is a scientist, into the beginnings of an advocate for branding, which was not an easy feat.
So many things that I want to break down in there. I mean, interviews are a very common thing. Talk a little bit about the workshops and what those were. Were the brand values workshops? Were there multiple ones, and what were the sort of the framework for those?
We started, or had the agency start, we gave them a list of a bunch of prospects and customers, and we talked through a list of questions that they were going to ask them about what was important to them around software that did the work that our software did, and then what did they think of OpenEye. And then what we basically did is we took some of those same questions, and in these workshops, we first had a workshop with our senior executive team, so our CEO, our chief commercial officer, chief technology officer, our chief scientific officer, some of the other like VPs in the company, and asked them some similar questions. And then we had a separate workshop with our top kind of science leaders, the folks that actually create the scientific applications in our software, as well as our top sales leaders and application scientists. And so there were two separate workshops, but what was interesting was the congruency of the responses and how they were similar to what our prospects and customers were telling us. But we also heard some things from our prospects and customers in the report out from the research that was quite different, things that they were looking for that we weren't aware of that would then influence how we would enhance and augment our brand going forward.
Interesting. So there was a opportunity that the research exposed, I guess is the best way of putting it, and some perceptual gap between what you all thought was out there and what they thought of you and what maybe you could be for these folks. There was some disconnect, because if everything was good, right? If they knew exactly who you were and they understood everything, life is easy. You can just keep moving.
Yeah, and the good news was it was actually good that there was some congruence and that there was some validation between our internal team and our prospect and customers that science was our distinctive, because that actually helped validate that doing any of this brand work was worthwhile. Because again, there was a lot of skepticism going into this. Our CEO was like, why do we need to do this? But when he saw that congruence, he was like, okay, now I get why we're doing this. This is important. That hooked him and the other leaders. And then they were more open to hear some of the feedback they weren't expecting. That, to your point, was the perception gap that then helped them realize, well, maybe we do need to make some adjustments in how we tell our story, how we go to market, how we look. Although I will say that our CEO was very clear. We are not changing the logo.
There are a couple of things that you said that it just reminded me of some painful moments in rebranding programs that I worked on, and remember vowing that I would never do another one where the CEO was skeptical, because if they start out skeptical, it's rare. And so you were lucky that the process brought him or her along. Often, and this is just my experience, that can derail the process. If the CEO is skeptical, what happens is when the brand is rolled out, the CEO is uninvested, and it becomes a real problem, because they're just, I'm doing this because the marketing person said I did, not that this is an opportunity for us to transform the organization. That's amazing that happened. And I think you're very fortunate, the light bulb went off at that moment.
Well, it was a testament to the agency that we selected. So we were very picky about the agency we worked with. So Raw Marketing did a fantastic job. But then secondly, their process was really what sold us, that this could actually convince our leadership team that this was a good thing. And yes, it was still a risk, but I was hopeful that it would come out with the result that we got. It was a little bit of luck, but a lot of it was just getting the right partner.
It's funny you mentioned the thing about process. I sent an email today to one of our fellow huddlers who was contemplating this and starting to begin to look at agencies. And I just said, process is as important as outcome when it comes to this. You've got to bring people along, execs and employees. So we'll definitely be back and talk about the rest of this journey. But now we're going to bring on Gabi Zijderveld, the CMO of SmartEye and star of episode 7 of this show and episode 106 of Renegade Marketers Unite. Hello, Gabi. Welcome back.
Hey, Drew. Thanks for having me again.
It's great to see you. And just to sort of ground the folks, I forgot to ask Marshall where he was, but I knew. Where are you today?
I am at home in Somerville, Massachusetts, actually not too far from where Heather is.
I know you guys could have gotten together and hung out and done a joint effort. Okay.
Next time.
Next time. So when we last spoke, you were at Affectiva, which was acquired by SmartEye. Talk a little bit about that transition. And again, it's a little bit unusual that the acquiring, you weren't the acquired brand, but you ended up becoming CMO for the parent company.
Yeah. So SmartEye is today, we're positioned as the leader in human insight AI. So we make technology that can understand, support, and predict human behavior in very complex environments. And our technology is predominantly known for being deployed in automotive. So it's automotive tech. And we build things such as driver monitoring systems. So understanding driver behavior, drowsiness, distraction, and then enabling car manufacturers with all the data we provide to build the appropriate interventions in a vehicle. There's a lot more to that, but that's essentially the core of what we're known for. At Affectiva, we started the field of emotion AI, and we were also becoming active in automotive. And there were definitely a lot of synergies between the two companies. And we had been talking partnership for quite some time when the conversation shifted to, hey, we actually want to buy you guys. Early on, it became very clear that the CEO of SmartEye was quite enchanted with the brand work we had done at Affectiva. He was kind of eyeing us as a potential competitor in the future. He really admired our marketing. And when I first started talking to him, well before closing the acquisition, it became apparent that he was quite keen on building something similar for the SmartEye company. And he also told me that almost, well, I wouldn't quite call it by design, but by circumstance, they had really underinvested in marketing. So they knew they were behind. And even before Affectiva came along, they had to do something better and update basically what they stood for as a company. Also, they did not have a senior seasoned marketing leader. So really, I was the right person at the right time at the right place.
Walking in. I love it. Let's talk about then you have these two brands. They need to become one brand. You sort of have to consolidate the story. Talk a little bit about the rebranding exercise that you've gone through a little bit. What were some of the initial steps?
Yeah, it was really interesting and a little tricky, right? Because we got acquired, but essentially it was a merger of the two companies. So SmartEye and Affectiva blending together into a new organization, where SmartEye for about 2 decades was known as a global leader in eye tracking systems. They as a company had already outgrown that because they were doing a lot more. Now Affectiva comes along and all our emotion AI technology is part of this. So we could no longer claim we're the global leader in eye tracking. We're the global leader in what? And it basically resulted in super fascinating discussions. Thankfully, the CEO of SmartEye and Rana El-Kayoubi, the founder and CEO of Affectiva, who is still also at the SmartEye company as deputy CEO, the two of them were very invested in working with me on figuring this out. Of course, there were a lot of press work that was done, press release, all the supporting assets announcing this acquisition, which was a big deal when it got announced in the industry. That was a forcing function. It really forced us to get together in a room and with our PR agency hash out, okay, how are we going to talk about this company? We landed at first on something a little bit generic, that we were going to become this global AI juggernaut that was going to build this amazing technology across industries, but starting with automotive. That was fine. It carried us through the acquisition announcements. But then as I dig into marketing with my Swedish team members, because SmartEye is headquartered in Sweden, with my team in the US, we realized like everything needs to be outdated. And global AI juggernaut is fine for a press release perhaps, but that's not really who we are. So we thankfully had the CEOs of the two companies super invested in it. We, together with an agency, and I can tell you more about that later, that was interesting too. We had many conversations, global leader in what? And then eventually, actually I was on one of my many pandemic walks in lovely Davis Square, Somerville, when it came to me. It's really human insight AI. We build technology that provides insight into human behavior in complex environments. And with that data, we can understand and support and predict and handle this human behavior. Came back to the group and it stuck. Everyone's like, okay, this is it. This is the path forward. And that's really, that happened this summer. So a couple of months after the acquisition, I think it was August. And that propelled us into a 6-month exercise that we're basically still in. We're kind of on the tail end, but we're still in it.
Okay, so I got to stop you there. So this has happened, and I tell this story in the book. There are many times in my career where the aha moment happened, the right words came out, put them on a page. And in one case, in one story I tell in the book, that there's this moment, which was the For Family Circle, where family comes first. Just a great line. Ended up being on the magazine for 19 years. However, that was all they did with this. And it was because we never actually had buy-in from the pub to really invest in the idea of it. And so when you have this moment of human insight AI and you can see all the things, as a marketer, you can sort of see where it goes. How did the process of getting everybody else on board work? Was it just, hey, I thought of this, let's all go? I mean, in which case you are blessed to work for an egoless environment where
no, never, right? What was actually really interesting, and this is also, it's still a learning process, I think, for all of us, because there truly are cultural differences. Sweden is very much a consensus building society, whereas in the US, we're more inclined to sometimes make top-down decisions and just make a decision and move on. The Swedes in general really like to think things over, take their time to think it over, and then they want to make sure that everyone's okay with that. And so we're landing on this human AI thing. We're beginning to define it. We're building it out. We're kind of building a narrative, a brand story around it. The CEOs are liking it. The agency is liking it. We're seeing a path forward. But no. We have to get this improved by the entire leadership team, which now with this merger, and it hadn't been streamlined yet, at the time was about 14 or 15 people. And we happened to have this annual strategy kickoff where everyone was in the same room in Gothenburg, Sweden. And the CEO really wanted me to get everyone to be okay with it. So I'm like, oh, okay. I was kind of fine deciding and moving on, but I'm like, okay, I'm a team player here. Let's do this. Everyone at first, everyone's like, yeah, it sounds good. So I'm kind of thinking, okay, thumbs up around the room and we move on. But no. Then we have to sleep on it. Literally, like, let's have everyone think about it overnight. And then the next day, let's get back together. Now, thankfully, this ended up being a 48-hour process. It could have also taken 4 months, which some other things did. But we came to an agreement. Everyone was a big thumbs up. There was soon thereafter a board meeting where the CEO took it to the board, who were quite enchanted and delighted with kind of the early materials we showed. Then after that board meeting, we had a company meeting where typically we do a readout on the financials because we're a publicly traded company. We briefly presented it to the company as well. Again, super big thumbs up.
Right.
The concept resonated, and then it was on the marketing team to start updating every single thing related to the company.
Right. So there's that moment where you're presenting it to this group of people and they say that they want to review it for 48 hours. That's a rip your heart out moment. I just know I have been there. It's a horrible thing when you know you have it. And again, the risk at that moment is it's so easy to kill ideas at that moment. And here's the reality of it also, and we're going to take a break in a second, but the reality is no idea is great until you make it real. So there you have it. So I'm going to plug CMO Huddles for a second. I know that you'll help me out in talking about this. We launched CMO Huddles in 2020. It's an invitation-only subscription service that brings together an elite group of CMOs to share, care, and dare each other to greatness. One CMO described Huddles as timely conversations with smart peers in a trusted environment, while another called it a cross between an expert workshop and a therapy session. And since Heather and Marshall and Gabi, you're all huddlers, feel free to sort of, share your experience and sort of thoughts. And did those words describe what we're talking about here?
Yeah, CMO Huddles has been the single best group I've joined in my entire career. I have gained so much insight and wisdom from the unselfish and generous best practice sharing that my peers and colleagues and friends in CMO Huddles have provided. And it more than pays for itself. I highly recommend it. And Drew is an amazing facilitator for all of our CMO Huddles conversations.
Okay, we're just going to end the show right now. Thank you. Gabi or Heather, anything to add?
Marshall, you captured it so well. But I to this day remember the first CMO huddle we did, Drew, or the first one I was part of. And it was in the early days of the pandemic when we were all just like kind of dumbstruck and figuring out what the heck was going on in the world and how we were all going to have to adapt. And from the early days, just the trust-based empathy and sharing and helping each other succeed, that ethos stuck, right? And now what are we, good 2 years in, it's still at the core of CMO Huddles. And I've met so many amazing folks like Heather and Marshall here today and have had so many frank conversations. It's just been amazing. Definitely one of the best peer groups I've ever been part of.
Love it. Heather?
I would just add, I think it's a really cost-effective way to have access to these insights and best practices and to get tips on the best vendors that people have worked with, and in some cases, the not so great vendors that people have worked with, just really open. And, the other thing I'd add is we can all get so caught up in our own challenges that, to your point about a therapy session, it's not that it's nice to hear about people's challenges, but, what is nice is occasionally when you've had experience with something and you can actually share your experience and help a huddler when you can, kind of contribute to that community and not just be kind of taking the ideas and insights for yourself.
Thank you for that. Those insights, and a couple of you mentioned the value that it delivers. It warms my heart is what I'm saying. So if you're a B2B CMO that can share and care and dare with the best of them, visit cmohuddles.com or hit me up on LinkedIn to see if you qualify for a guest pass. Let's get to our full-bodied B2B branding discussion. So one of the challenges that you all face is, you got to get budget for an agency, you got to get budget for the process, and then of course you got to get budget for executing, because there's no good in coming up with this thing and not being able to execute it. And in order to get budget, you need to be able to talk about metrics. So I'm curious, and we'll just start with Heather. Talk a little bit about how you're thinking about measuring the impact of this new brand program.
I would say we're still on a journey here to get to the perfect KPIs, but we have been looking at engagement through our social channels, traffic to our website. It is always lovely when, along with the investment in brand, comes an increase in demand gen. And I would love to say that was, I hope certainly that there has been a strong connection there. We have seen tremendous lift in the interest in Appcast. We have also been working with a PR agency, and so looking at share of voice and mentions, et cetera, that's been another very helpful metric for us.
Interesting. Marshall, what about you? Now, I know you're still in the process of developing materials and getting this out there, but have you already talked about metrics for brand?
Yeah, we're starting to talk about this. We haven't fully rolled out the enhanced brand yet. We're still just finishing that up, but we're already starting to think about how are you going to measure kind of top of mind, aided and unaided brand awareness? How are we going to measure brand perception, brand sentiment, purchase intent? We're already starting to figure out and calculate what would our customer lifetime value be and our brand loyalty as it relates to that. So kind of building on some of the same metrics that Heather mentioned, we want to track all that too, but we want to also look at these more higher level strategic metrics. Now, what tools we're going to use to do that, what partners are we going to need to bring to help us do that? We haven't yet figured that out, but we will soon.
And Gabi, I know we talked about this a little bit in the huddle because you referenced my book, but let's talk a little bit about what we'll call it the low budget ways that you're thinking about.
For us, there's, I think, just a lot of low hanging fruit, because in the past, the Smart Eye company really didn't do that many measurements around any of the marketing. And now we're basically in the middle of reworking all brand assets, including a website update. And it's given us an opportunity to reflect on, okay, what is just the bare minimum that we should be tracking? Because even that hadn't been done in the past. For myself, formulated it into really 3 buckets. Obviously, or the very obvious, increasing brand awareness and visibility for the company. So measuring a lot of the same things that Heather and Marshall are measuring. Definitely PR has always been a good lever. So what is share of voice? What are the mentions? What kind of site traffic do we see? Do we see our site traffic increase as we put better content out there? What kind of engagement on social media, mentions on social media? And I really did find your book, Drew, super helpful there, because there's no way I'm going to have budget anytime soon to do a really in-depth brand study, nor do I think I have the time or energy to even conceive of that. And it would be overkill right now. Let's get the basics in place first. And your book actually gave us some really good ideas of, what are some of the things we could be measuring. We're beginning to dive into that. And then there's two other categories we're going to look at, which is for some of our business areas, lead generation is definitely relevant, and we want to generate more high quality leads. But for example, for our automotive business, it's really not about lead gen. We're talking to all the car manufacturers already.
Right.
So it's making sure that key stakeholders in those accounts are aware of what we're doing, that we keep them engaged with the content we put out. That's another area, a little bit of a light touch account-based marketing approach.
I mean, yeah, there aren't that many car manufacturers, although thanks to electric, there are a lot more than there were 10 years ago.
Sure.
So really this comes down to what, Ross Graber was talking about in our bonus huddle on metrics. It's for you, it's what percentage of those opportunities are you actually participating in? And, one way to look at awareness is if you have high awareness, most likely you're going to get to participate in all the opportunities. And if you have low awareness, you're probably not going to participate in any of them. And just for the listeners, because I did this the other day in an earlier show, and at least a couple people hit me up for it, I'm more than happy to send you the chapter on metrics in my book, chapter 10, Measure What Matters. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'll send you that chapter, and I think you'll get some ideas on how to measure on the cheap. Okay, you guys have all gone through this process. You're at various stages of it. I'm just wondering about aha moments when the members suddenly get the brand. I'm going to go to you, Marshall, because we talked about that a bit. What was it that sort of helped your CEO get it?
He founded the company 25 years ago, actually, next week. So he knows the company intimately. And the fact that prospects and customers were telling us in the brand research that basing our brand on the scientific work that we do is critical, has been critical, needs to continue to be critical. That was his aha moment, because he said, that's it. I built this company to be based on science. You're telling me what I want to hear, and you're telling me that we should keep doing that. So that validated for him that this brand work was worthwhile, and that he should, listen to what the recommendations were, maybe the perception gaps with customers and prospects.
Right. And so there was this moment of, we're on the same page. You just validated 25 years of my life, because this company is called OpenEye Scientific. We've been delivering that, and the customer saying, yeah, that's really important to us. And not but we can add to the story. And that's so interesting as a reminder to you all as a CMO, if you don't really know what your CEO thinks about his brand and his business, and don't have that as a core level of understanding, and can't deliver information that sort of validates some of the core beliefs of them, you may run into a problem. So that's a great aha moment. Gabi, Heather, an aha moment for you?
I would say that when the agency that we were working with, and I can't remember if I said their name before it, but it's something familiar. The first time that they presented their findings to our CEO, and they spoke so passionately and articulately about this incongruity, this lack of congruence between what they saw and what they had heard from their interviews with customers, employees, the leadership team, and then what they saw. And when they presented that to the CEO, I think because they are experts and they had the words that maybe I didn't have, he's so smart and reasonable that he was like, okay, I get it. Like, I get why we need to make a change and why we need a refresh.
And I just want to sort of remind the folks that are listening, this is one of the things you can do a lot in-house. You can do so much in-house today. And it's not just because personally I've done a lot of these rebranding things, and Renegade has, having an outsider being able to talk and show your brand and show a mirror to your brand to your executives will be invaluable. Okay, Gabi, another aha moment for you?
Yeah, I think for me, there was certainly an aha moment for me personally, right? The company had already, I think in 2016, created a brand book with an agency that they had been using. It's a boutique firm called Milk in Gothenburg. So I more or less inherit the agency, and I made a point of getting to know these people early in the summer. I really actually liked their work. I clicked with them personally. I'm like, I'm not going to shake this up. I'm going to work with with these guys. And the CEO of Smart Eye had already established a relationship with this agency and had been invested in that prior brand book. So my aha moment was, I can work on messaging until the cows come home and update the website, but no, we're going to update the brand book. We're going to literally, together with the agency and the two CEOs, step through the brand book page by page and discuss all content. And this is where I have gotten appreciation for the Swedish approach of taking your time and building consensus. I really got to appreciate that in this process. Yes, it took several months, maybe even half a year, but it forced us to revisit every single word we used to describe the company in a very thoughtful and deliberate manner. It took a lot of time, but it was a really productive process.
It should take a lot of time. And we used to get RFPs and so on. We want to rebrand and we need it in 6 weeks. And we'll say, thanks. Yeah, that's not going to work. And it's not going to work because you're thinking about this as a logo and a color thing. And when it's really about transforming the company and, delivering a new promise and backing it up with changed behavior. Anyway, this is the moment in time in the show where I always ask, what would Ben Franklin say? And what's interesting to me in this thing is the process that we're going through here, the strategic process. Every agency has a slight different process, but the important thing is they have a process and they go through it, and that you do this thing step by step, and that this is not guesswork. There's a process here that goes in. So what Franklin would say is, he that lives on hope dies fasting. This is not a process that is about, I hope this works, as that won't work out. No, you got to get commitment. And one of the things that Gabi just said that I think is so important in all this is you do need your executive team to be on board. You do need your employees to be on board. Enough of my preaching. Let's get back to the guests. You've all worked with agency partners. How about a tip on working with them and getting the most out of them? Marshall.
Yeah, even though our brand and agency partner has expertise in the life sciences industry, we did have to spend considerable time educating them on our unique industry segment in pharma and biotech software and the buyers that we serve. I would say it's important to set aside time up front to really help the agency grasp your buyers, your company, your products and services value proposition, positioning, and messaging. Hopefully they will have some background. Hopefully you pick an agency that has some understanding, but to really help them get you and your buyers, you've got to invest a little time to educate them and get them just really rock solid on that.
I think this goes back to this process of making sure that your executives know what they've signed up for and that they're going to participate in, that whoever is going to be doing the educating is committed to being available. Heather, what about you in terms of working with your agency?
Something familiar, our agency. Frankly, I think they managed me as much as I managed them. And I think that's really important because I think in an effective relationship, it's based on respect. It's a two-way street. And frankly, we needed to be pushed a little bit. We were a little bit of a uptight Northeastern tech company based in New Hampshire, and they pushed us. And, we were here. They maybe wanted us to go here, and we got to here, right? We got to a happy medium, but we wouldn't have gotten there if they hadn't pushed us. So Gabi, you kind of alluded to this, but working with people with whom you connect, with whom there is trust and respect, and let them push you.
Interesting. I did an interview with Carla Pinheiro-Sublet, who's now the CMO at IBM, and she had gone through a rebranding at NI. And I remember her saying, the agency said to her, well, one of these ideas is going to feel really safe, and this one is going to scare the crap out of you.
Yeah. Right.
And I love that. And there is a feeling there, because if it's so comfortable that it doesn't challenge you at all, then there's a chance it's boring. It doesn't do it. Okay, Gabi, what's your tip for managing your agency partners?
Yeah, actually what both Marshall and Heather said really resonated. But I think what for us proved to be really important, I highly recommend to everyone, is continuously invested time. For us now, it's been this 6+ month process and we're not done yet. We invested a lot of time explaining to them how this company had changed and how our technology had evolved and why it mattered in the industry. But also to this day, if there's anything we work on together and it needs to iterate on it, I spend a lot of time explaining to them why I want it changed or why I'm editing something, because only that collaborative process is going to make it better. So time consuming, but really worth it, I think.
Well, and again, it's time consuming because it's really important. It's a lot of time for the CMO, but it's also time for the other execs. And hopefully you get your employees involved. Now, this is going to put you in an awkward position, and I didn't prepare you for this. So I'm going to try to figure out a way. A fellow CMO in Huddles is about to explore on this thing. Brand is roughly where you guys are in terms of size, trying to figure out how much to budget and, to get for this. And I know that we're talking about different things if we're talking about a rebrand that includes logo and signage and changing everything. And the other is, we'll call it a repositioning. Ballpark, 100K, 200K. Help this individual. You don't have to share your own budget, but how should they think about budgeting for rebranding?
I believe we spent around $100,000, and it was for the brand strategy work, the development of that new visual identity, and then the development of the website.
That's a bargain.
I will say that we lucked out in that we found this agency that was sort of starting out, and now they're, a few more years in, and so their prices may be higher now. But
so you got a deal, because to get a rebrand with logos and a new website, that's really inexpensive.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually, Heather, because I think I'm looking at about the same when all is said and done, including a website redesign and the web development. Not a complete web development, but just some WordPress work that a web developer had to do.
100 grand. Interesting. Okay. Marshall, range?
Yeah, I would say kind of similar range, 100 to 150 when you include the brand rework and then the web stuff. Although what's interesting is all of that seemed like huge dollars to our executive leadership team. They were shocked, right? And I had to explain to them, no, this is a bargain. Bigger companies could spend hundreds of thousands, multiple hundreds of thousands, or millions of dollars. So, once I level set them in terms of that cost, then they were more okay with it. I think it's reasonable. All of us are in the same ballpark.
May I make a comment? I would also venture to say that because I think we're also in kind of similar stages, possibly. We did a lot in-house as well. And I'm sure Heather and Marshall, you guys did too, in terms of writing content, developing assets. When you do it at a budget like that, you just end up taking a lot in-house.
I'm so glad you said that, Gabi, because that has to be the case. And given the fact that right now, at least, so many companies are rebranding, a lot of branding firms don't have capacity. I mean, we've been trying to find branding firms for huddlers, and it said, well, we could start in May, which is just such an unusual situation. All right, well, we're getting down to the end, so we need a quick final words of wisdom. It's like a Tuesday tip, but we're Thursday. So just one thought. Start us off, Heather, with advising your fellow CMOs on getting brand building right.
Find a good agency with people that you enjoy working with. You're going to spend a lot of time with them. Make sure you find a good partner.
I love that. Okay, so we're going to have some fun along the way with a good partner. Okay, then Marshall, your tip.
Employees can be your best brand ambassadors. They want to feel like they're contributing to the company's success. You can empower them with high-level messages to share about the brand. And I've even had a situation in a past company where an employee actually helped lead to a multi-million-dollar sale. They weren't even a customer-facing employee. They shared it with a neighbor. Their neighbor's husband worked for a buyer, and it turned into a sale. So empowering them with messages is a great idea and should be part of your brand work.
By the way, I believe in that really strongly. One of the things that in the book, I include an employee survey that I strongly, if you're about to begin on this thing, put that survey out there. Again, if you want a copy of that survey, just hit me up on LinkedIn. Gabi, final thought.
My tip would be to definitely start with your messaging. Figure out who you are, why you exist, why it matters, and who cares.
I love it. Okay. Thank you, Heather, Marshall, Gabi. You're all great sports. Thank you, audience, for staying with us. I'm your host, Drew Neiser. And until next time, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong. To hear more conversations like this one and submit your own questions while we're live, join us on the next Renegade Marketers Live. We stream to my LinkedIn, that's Drew Neiser, every other week.